Do you think there's more or less risk of an eye injury than getting coronavirus from playing basketball? So an eye injury without goggles versus getting coronavirus without a mask.
I don't know.
I just thought of that as you were talking about it. I thought, even when I go to watch the kids' games, I'm like, man, all these kids should have safety goggles on. And I'm not that adamant. I mean, I should be more adamant with my patients about it, even if they don't have prescriptions to wear something.
There's probably a higher risk of getting coronavirus than an eye injury. And I say that because of all of the basketball games I've been to over the last
you've never seen it.
12 years. I've not seen an eye injury, yet people are getting coronavirus. So
are they getting it for playing basketball?
Probably at least somewhat.
I would guess that's true. I don't know. I mean, I guess I think of, I was just thinking through, like, if you get a finger to the eye and you get a retinal, something retinal going on, it's a severe trauma. Your morbidity as a child playing basketball is probably going to be worse with an ocular trauma than it will be from coronavirus.
Absolutely.
But I mean, obviously your ocular trauma is not going to spread to somebody else. Of course, I get that. It's just interesting as I'm thinking through that. It's like, we probably should be more adamant with our patients after coronavirus, to be like, this is something you really need to think about.
Yeah.
Probably be more diligent. Anyway.
I'm super diligent. I don't know what you're talking about.
Are you?
Sometimes, one of my patients, one of my ortho
patients who don't wear glasses at all or don't wear contacts at all?
Not them. Not as much as I should be. No.
Yeah.
But
so
I even talk a lot about concussion protection with my soccer players, like making sure they're wearing a concussion headband and stuff. I recommend that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have anything to do with eyes, but I still care about their brains.
Yeah, it absolutely can.
Well, it can. Yes, it can. But yeah. So, anyways, seriously, my watch is talking to me. Does your watch ever just talk during exams?
So, no, I turn that off.
Mine is on silent. I swear to God, it is on silent, but still sometimes it picks up.
Dr. Chapman, that is the wrong treatment for herpes simplex. You do not want a steroid for epithelial disease.
No, usually it'll say something like, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I have my watch is Australian.
Australian. It's Aussie. Okay.
And so it'll say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that?
Nice.
It's awesome. And it's a male Siri, male Australian Siri.
Okay. I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, it's pretty great. When I'm getting directions on maps, it has me go to the car park instead of a parking lot. So it uses like
it even
Australian.
Changes the dialect. Wow.
Yeah. That makes it really fun.
Okay, that would be better. Much better. Hello and welcome to the Crucible Podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with Dr. Cheryl Chapman about myopia management, axial length, assessing fees and how to structure those fees. We talked about managed vision care plans and how to incorporate those or remove them from your practice. It's a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, and share it with your friends. And support those who support us. We've been providing myopia control treatments in our practice for years. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, CooperVision has received FDA approval of its innovative MySight one-day contact lens. This will be the cornerstone of a comprehensive myopia management approach to be offered by CooperVision. This daily wear, single-use contact lens is the first and only FDA-approved product clinically proven to slow the progression of myopia when initially prescribed for children 8 to 12 years old and when compared to children in the control group wearing a single vision one-day contact lens. Check out the show notes for all the specific prescribing details and to get more information about this lens and how you can begin to offer it in your practice. you and I have had conversations about myopia management a ton, and the thing that I wanted to have you on and kind of pick your brain about is myopia management in general, but also specifically axial length, and where you're finding it valuable as a clinician. And you probably heard, and you and I have talked about this, but just there sort of seems to be this like one side that likes to say you got to do axial length, and one side that says you don't have to do it. And I tend to think, and I'm not trying to put you in any of these boxes because I don't know honestly which one you're in, except to say that I know you've put a lot of value in it. But I see people, and I don't think you're this type of person, because I can say that because I know you well enough to say that, but I see people where I get the feeling that they're talking so heavily about axial length to make myopia management more complex than it needs to be, so that you have to send them your patients because it's too hard for you to do. That's the sense I get from some people who talk about axial length. So I'm not asking you to throw those people under the bus. I'm just saying like that makes me a little leery of saying you gotta do it, because I don't think you have to.
So I definitely would not throw those people under the bus. I would say that anybody who comes off that way to you is probably just so passionate, and they're maybe just not expressing themselves in a way that comes across effectively. Because my experience with people who are really passionate about the axial length measurements is, if you really watch some of their conversation threads as they go back and forth, it's like they've had this epiphany. Especially if you are talking about maybe a person who has done myopia management for a very, very long time, and for a long time did it without axial length. And then when they started to introduce axial length, they'll say things like, I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, it was so eye-opening for me. And I think that that's what I found, because when I started myopia management, I did not have an IOL master, and I thought I was, trucking along okay. But then once I got my IOL master and I started measuring axial length, I was just like, wow, like this decision I would have made differently without that information.
Can you give me an example of that?
So I think the biggest example would just be atropine. When I started using atropine, it was before the LAMP study came out, and I was using 0.01%, like a lot of folks were. And I thought I was doing okay. I thought I was controlling myopia.
Because you were just controlling refractive error? Because
I was just controlling refractive error. And then when I got the IOL master and I started incorporating that, I was seeing the axial length shoot up. And then I was like, well, I'm going to increase their atropine. So I would go up to like a 0.02% or a 0.03% because those percentages were available at my pharmacy. And I would not stop increasing it until I saw axial length stabilize. And so that's how I started treating patients with atropine. And a little bit later on down the road, the LAMP study came out, and it was really interesting to me, but not surprising, to see the discrepancies between spherical equivalent and axial length when it came to those different concentrations of atropine, because I had already seen it myself clinically, and I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't started measuring axial length.
When do you think, so did axial length, when you see it, think about that. So if we take that back to where you're not using axial length yet, so in your myopia management practice, and would you say that like axial length was preceding refractive error by 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, like where you were seeing axial length, axial elongation, but the refractive error was staying relatively stable? And then all of a sudden you see, so like how far in the process, if you're just using refraction, are you missing the opportunity to intervene differently?
I think
just as an estimate.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to answer, Chris, because I just probably don't have enough clinical experience. I don't have a high enough number of cases over a long enough period of time to answer it very effectively. Mm-hmm. So I would guess at least 12 months. So
you'd see it a year before?
Maybe.
I'm
guessing.
Progression a year before.
I'm really guessing, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely not 3 months.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's 5 years.
Yeah. Do you think it's like, so it's, you could probably think about it something like the difference between a structural and a functional change in a patient who has glaucoma, where, obviously this would be a structural change that you would naturally think precedes a functional change of where the light is focused. Maybe that's one way to think about it. But why wouldn't it be an automatic one-to-one relationship?
You mean spherical equivalent and axial length?
Right.
Because
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, because think about atropine. What do we know about atropine's mechanism of action? Well, we have about 8 different theories, right?
Right.
So we do know that in myopia management, and not just with atropine, but with other methods as well, we do know that we get that choroidal thickening, right?
Right.
So you can have, okay, so it's really interesting. When I start patients on atropine and I'm measuring their axial length, they will very frequently measure with a shorter axial length after you start their treatment.
Right, because the choroid thickens and pushes.
Because the choroid thickens. And so if you're only measuring refraction, when I started, what I was often seeing was that after they started their atropine therapy, they would come back and they would not, maybe they were a minus 1.25 initially. And then when they came back for their follow-up, they measured a -1. And then it's like, oh.
Are you attributing that all to choroidal? Sorry to interrupt, but are you attributing that all to choroidal thickening or any amount to just relaxing accommodative?
Okay, so it's not relaxation of accommodation because I did a cycloplegic refraction before I started that.
Okay.
So my baseline, if my baseline refraction I have set at a minus 1.25 for that patient, and then they come back 3 months later and they measure a -1, like what do we assume? Oh, I must have over minus them, right?
Right.
But I didn't because I started with a cycloplegic refraction. But I guarantee that goes through doctors' minds all the time. Like, oh, I must have over minus this patient, or, oh, their subjective response was one way this way or one way that way. But I saw it all the time, where they were measuring less minus. So that's part of it. So then let's say if you are not measuring axial length and you're doing that refraction and you start them with at a minus 1.25 and you see them back at -1, and then you see them back at minus 1.25 6 months later, then you think, oh, they're stable. No, they've just progressed a quarter. Right? Because now with choroidal thickening, they're measuring minus 1.25. So
is zero progression your acceptable amount?
Zero. In a perfect world, maybe. But no, I think if you listen to Jeffrey Cooper, I listen to a lot of what he has to say, and I'm really excited that we're getting more information on axial length all the time in terms of new studies that are coming out, and they're starting to develop some more normal like growth charts and such. But I listen to a lot of what he says and put a lot of weight in that. And what he has said in the past, and I haven't heard anything different recently, is that if the eye increases length by 0.06 millimeters in a 3-month period, or less than that, then that is normal. But more than that would be more than you would expect.
Right. And so, well, I think the case, I think I'm digging personally for reasons where I would say, guy, I really need to do this, right? I need to measure axial length in my myopia patients. And I'm close, but I've been close for a long time. So my default, as I've told you before, is like, I'm on the fence, and my default on the fence is to do nothing, right? To do nothing different, right? So let's go down that path. And so you've got your patient that essentially has progressed by a click over three months or 6 months. But you're basing whether or not you're making the determination to increase therapy, whether it's atropine or, really that would be the only way that would be the only way you'd increase it. Or maybe you would increase maybe a soft lens and increase the amount of peripheral plus you're giving that patient, or add plus that you're giving that patient. Or maybe you might, for your ortho-K patients, you may change your your optical zone diameter so that you're making it smaller to get more peripheral plus. Like those would be the things you'd be thinking of to say, okay, we've had this click of progression, or maybe the 0.06 millimeter progression larger than that, then it's time to do something else. Like you're saying, my treatment isn't enough. I've got to stabilize this more. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes, that is correct. So there's all sorts of ways you can play the game. Maybe if they're a soft multifocal contact lens wearer, if appropriate, maybe you switch them to Ortho-K, or maybe you do a dual therapy and you add atropine on top of that. And with regards to Ortho-K, with the more customizable software designed lenses, it's not only that we can adjust that treatment zone size, it's that we can also adjust the depth of that return zone for that stronger peripheral power profile. There's so many ways that you can play with that. I have one patient, I might have two patients, I think, that are on both Ortho-K and atropine. It's really cool that we can combine these therapies for increased effectiveness. And I do think that axial length is most valuable with regards to treating atropine. But I find
not even Ortho-K?
Well, most valuable with regards to atropine, but I have found it to be useful with Ortho-K as well, because, that Ortho-K refraction can sometimes be so variable based on what time of day you're seeing them back, or again, those subjective responses, and I'm not cyclopleging them at every follow-up. So I had one patient that progressed in axial length, and I was chatting with my specialty contact lens technician about it, and I was like, look at this, if we didn't have their axial length, we wouldn't have known this was happening. And so it's just interesting. Like I say, Chris, once you get your axial length measurement, you are going to love it, and you're going to wish you had done it sooner.
No, it's like, I understand it. I understand what you're saying. And I completely understand why you'd say that. I mean, I think about just my epiphany on pressing on a meibomian gland when I was in my fourth year of optometry school at the scleral depressor, and watching what comes out. And I was like, it was just mine. And then I can't not see a patient now and not focus on the lids, and not even want to push on the lids. Not just push, but like get out of Mastrota paddle and numb them up and let's go. So I'm there. Like once you go there, it's hard to go back. I get that. So all right. So then let's talk about what other nuances are you finding with axial length, or with just treatment options that have been kind of epiphanies for you before we kind of move on to other things?
So I think that, we've talked about this before. I think that once you have the ability to measure axial length, one of the really great things you can do is add it into routine care for kids. I love to get baseline axial length measurements on these kids. And once you do it repeatedly and you do it enough, you just start to get more of a clinical sense of like, oh, that's a pretty typical axial length for somebody who's a +2. That's a pretty typical axial length for somebody who's a -1. And just gaining that sort of overall knowledge helps you, I think, when you are trying to look at a more complex case or a trickier case, to just have that sort of like background knowledge. I guess you could, if you wanted to talk about meibomian glands, you could say, well, if you push on every single person's meibomian glands, you know what normal looks like.
Yeah, totally.
So, so it's nice to know what it's like when it's not normal. I had a adult patient 2 weeks ago, and she had some lacquer cracks, and she was like a -7, -8, something like that. But I had the staff measure her axial length. I want to know how long her eye was. And it was over 28 millimeters long. It was like, whoa, that's a long eye. Like, am I really seeing lacquer cracks here? Sure enough, I am. Oh yeah, that's a 28 millimeter eye. That's not unexpected. So it's just really interesting to sort of start to gain that overall clinical sense of what normal is.
Yeah, I think it's so I think one of the things that Well, that's the biggest thing that I think is a challenge for most. And I know that you advocate for saying, look, doctors are doctors. They can get into the complex and they can handle complex. And I completely agree with you. I think there's two things that I see that inhibit docs from really embracing myopia management. And the first one is they get too bogged down in the details.
Yes.
And figuring out, okay, if I see this, I don't know what to do. Like, no, I always think it's important. Just start as simply as you can, integrate one thing until you've mastered it, and then expand it into other populations. So where I guess my jaded sense when I listen to people talk about the necessity of axial length is like, you're already making it too complicated. Like you and I have just rattled off 0.6 millimeter change and, over this period of time, and like these different atropine doses. And, most people that haven't thought about it is they're just shutting their brains down. Because even when we prescribe normal medication, I'm telling you, even though we prescribe normal medications, you don't think when you prescribe Lotemax, you're not thinking about the percentage, and you're not thinking about having to modify the percentage of it,
Yes. I think these people, they're just excited about it, Chris. So
no, I get it. No, they are excited. No, I totally get that. I'm trying to say, my whole goal is if we want more people to do it, which I believe you and I agree on that.
Yes.
You want more doctors to embrace this technology. At first, we make it as super simple as we possibly can. And then I think they pick up on the nuance. So
my dream is that more doctors will start doing myopia management. And if they have to start small, they have to start small. But I think we have to be really careful too, to give people the tools to not do such a halfway job that they do it poorly. A lot of people say, don't dabble. Okay, if you're going to do myopia management, commit, have an action plan, and yes, start small, but dream towards getting better all the time. I don't expect everybody to go out and buy a topographer and axial length and everything like all at once. I really don't expect people to do that. But my dream is that every doctor that is doing myopia management is working towards the day that they can buy their axial length instrument. And I think it's wonderful that we're seeing some combo machines come to market.
Yeah.
Because doctors who are just getting started, if they're going to buy a topographer, it's really easy to say, well, why don't I just get something that does both topography and axial length? And I think you're going to see huge uptake of axial length because of those instruments, which is going to be really great. But yeah, I want everybody to hopefully have in their mind that they're working towards getting that axial length instrument.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you on that. I don't disagree with that scenario, and I also don't disagree with the idea that we don't want people to dabble. But I do think I'll still stick to this is that in the sense of like I wouldn't necessarily call it dabbling if you start and say, look, I'm gonna start all my myopes on, even if it's a different dose than what I would say, but maybe it's 0.25%, or if you're going to incorporate lamping is 0.5%, whichever it is, right?
Right.
Then if you just say, I'm going to do that, I'm going to offer that to all my patients, I guess I just wouldn't call that dabbling, because it's doing more than if you would have just given them a spherical correction, right?
Right, but I would say...
And that could open the door to the confidence of saying, why is this person progressing? Maybe if I would have an axial length measurement, or I may have seen them 3 months before. I guess I'm just saying maybe that sort of stimulates additional curiosity.
I would say, Chris, that it is dabbling if they just prescribe atropine and want to see them in a year. Did I say that? No, you didn't say that. You didn't specify a timeline.
Right.
You just said prescribe atropine. But I think it's really important for docs to get it, that you don't just prescribe atropine and see them in a year.
No, you're managing a disease. That you have to get to that point. So it's just like you wouldn't prescribe a glaucoma medication and see the patient back in a year. You're gonna check back to see that they're not having any side effects, and that they're tolerating the medication okay, and that they're responding to the medication okay. So I'm right there with you.
So let me put in another plug for axial length. If if you do have an instrument that can gather quickly, easily, and accurately measurements on kids, a lot of times and I know that you know this because we've talked about this, but I want other people to hear this. If you see them and they are not as farsighted as you would expect at a young age, and you have a baseline axial length measurement, that's super useful because you can say, you know what, rather than waiting and seeing this kid back in a year, they're plus 50, they're 5 years old and they're plus 50. Rather than waiting and seeing them again in a year, how about I see them again in 3 months, or I see them again in 6 months and I measure their axial length. And so what the studies have shown us is that kids will start to, their axial length will start to increase how quickly it's growing, how quickly it's changing, up to 3 years before they actually transition into myopia. And you will see even quicker acceleration for a full year before they transition into myopia. And so if I've got these little kids and I've got their baseline axial measurements and I've got maybe 2 or 3 years worth of data on their axial length measurements, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at them saying, they don't look like they're as hyperopic as they should be. And wow, look at what that axial length is doing over time. Like it's really changed a lot more in the last 6 months than it did for the 2 years prior. I know they're going to transition into myopia. And I think it's really cool to say, hey, mom is -8. Older brother is already in ortho K because he was -2.5 by the time he was 6 years old. And now little brother is on that same path. And he's plus 1/4 and we're starting him on atropine today. And guess what? If we do a good job and he's really responsive to the atropine therapy, like he may never have any meaningful amount of myopia. And I say that because I have that exact example in my office right now. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool because I think probably if you haven't convinced me yet, I'm playing devil's advocate, but if you haven't convinced me about the pure measurement of axial length, what all of this does is it actually allows you to start the conversation really early with the parents because
so much.
Because it does, the hardest part about myopia management in today's world is that most people aren't doing it. I mean, I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but I would say in our circle of people that we know, there's probably a couple people. I mean, right. in a city like Omaha, where there's, let's say, 100 eye care providers, there's probably a handful, and maybe that's being generous, that are actually really taking this and like really embraced it in terms of their practice philosophy. So I say that to say that if that's the case, then if it's Cheryl Chapman and Chris Wolf and 3 or 4 other people talking about it to their patients, then nobody knows about it. How many times you see a patient and it's like, oh, here we have these other options. Like, what? You have these other options? Why did anybody? It's like, well, and then you get in this spot where you don't want to throw somebody under the bus, but you want to be.
Well, actually, Chris, my patients say, should I see you or should I see Chris Wolf? And I say, well, Chris Wolf doesn't have axial length, so you definitely want to see me. But realistically, Chris, I've been talking to my patients about this long enough now that they know that I'm going above and beyond, and they know that I'm the one they want to be talking to about this because they know everything that I'm doing, and they've gotten that message. And here's another plug for axial length. Patients don't know what a diopter is. They have absolutely no idea. They might have an idea of a number that they find on their contact lens box, but it's very difficult for them to conceptualize what a diopter is. But if you talk to them about a unit of measurement that is a millimeter, they understand what a millimeter is. So yes, it makes it very easy to have that conversation with a patient or the patient's parent and have them actually be able to follow along and understand, oh, well, I don't want my eyes to get longer. And we measure them in millimeters, and this is the millimeter measurement today. And this was the millimeter measurement 3 months ago. It's not unusual for me now to see some of these young kids back in 3 months or 6 months simply for refraction and axial length measurement to see if they're progressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings me to, I think, probably number 2, and you probably know what I think about number 2 is the other reason that myopia management is hard to uptake, which is how do I make it work in my practice from a financial standpoint?
Yeah.
I think that's the other deterrent. And I think the cool part about it is I believe there are more than one ways to integrate this into a practice to make it so that patients benefit and you're not and the practice benefits as well, right? I think there are more than one ways to do that. And I actually think most people probably make it more complicated than it needs to be. So tell me your method and tell me, how you're kind of following those patients and how, what are you going to charge? Because that's the first thing everybody's thinking if they don't do this. Well, you're going to see them back in 3 months. Do I charge a comprehensive exam? Do I charge them a refraction? Do I charge them for an A scan, a topography? Do I bill their insurance? I mean, that's going through everybody's minds as you say that.
Right. Yeah, it's really challenging, and it's always a work in progress. And I have evolved over time, trying different things out. I will tell you, when I started with like a 1-year global fee, 1-year contract. And I did that because I really wanted to make it very clean and make it so that people were not encouraged to skip follow-up visits because they've already paid for it all up front. Then I switched to a 2-year contract because I wanted to have just a longer period of time before I was asking people for money again. And I wanted to have more time to do more complex ortho K fits because sometimes it takes a while before you get that patient really finalized. And actually just recently, in part due to some of the conversations that we have had, we have sort of reworked our fees just within the last couple of weeks, where I'm not doing it entirely like you are, but we are breaking it into payments where our overall profitability is really quite similar, but the patients aren't paying the whole fee up front. They're paying a chunk up front, and then they're paying for each of their follow-up visits. With Ortho K, it's a little bit different because they're not paying for that 1 day, 1 week, or 1 month visit, but they're paying for their 3, 6, and 9 month visits. And one of the reasons we did that was because, patients would often ask, do you have a financing option? And we would say, well, yes, we do. It's care credit. And people just don't want to sign up for care credit. They don't want to have their credit score checked. They don't want to take on a new credit card. And especially this year, I've seen it more so this year. I think people are just really freaked out by everything that's going on. And so we are still kind of front loading that cost a little bit to cover our cost of goods on the lenses and things like that. But we are allowing them to pay a little bit of piecemeal when they come back for their follow-up visits. And that way, if they don't end up coming back, we haven't lost out on a ton of money. So we'll see how that goes. If I find that we're just getting really poor compliance on follow-ups, I may have to rework it again. So I think there's 2 things to that, because I like that story. I didn't know that, by the way. I didn't know that. No, that's the first time I've told you.
Yeah, and I think because I know you and I have talked about it, and I don't think it's necessarily the right way, but one of the hard parts with all of this is that if you want to make it accessible to patients, you also have to make it workable in your practice. But if you do those 2 things, they sometimes don't always work out. But in a model like you're describing, I think it does tend to probably work. I would assume that it would probably work more. I mean, I'll have 3 kids in braces. I have 3 kids in braces, or have had. So my oldest daughter is out of them. But and our orthodontist, she's got a fee, but it's basically it's a payment plan. So if you wanted to, it's a payment plan. And she didn't even give a time of service savings if we said, look, we'll pay you all of it right now. What's that worth? And they're like, no, we don't do that. And we're like, you wouldn't take this money right now and give us it. And then they finally were like, okay, we'll do that, but it wasn't that much. Yeah. But I think my point is that that's how they were set up. It's like, okay, it's going to be a treatment of 2 years. And then it was, I don't know, whatever that was. And then they were going to split it up over a monthly payment. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I think there's a lot to be said for that, because you can tell that patient right up front. And, I guess if our kids stopped going for their braces and we just let them, then, I think we wouldn't expect that their outcome would be very good. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do like to compare Ortho-K to orthodontia. And I often make that analogy to patients because I think it's easier for them to wrap their heads around it. It's really funny. I had a patient actually say to me, I guess everything that starts with ortho is just expensive, huh? And I was like, yep, pretty much. But my orthodontist does that too, where they're like, all right, this is your total cost. And here, go talk to our business lady and she'll help you set up your payment plan. And it's nice because then for families who have HSA or FSA, then they can use that and they're going to be putting money, in there again at the beginning of the year or throughout the year. And so they can keep filling up their HSA and then keep paying it out of their HSA. So I think I'm hoping, that's the whole reason I reworked it, Chris, is because I really do want myopia management to be accessible to more people. But at the same time, it still has to be profitable.
Do it for free. Yeah, I know.
Or can't do it for free. It's too hard. Doctors won't want to put in the time to learn it well if it's not going to make them money.
Yeah. And I think that's my shtick, right? Is like, if I can just show a doctor how this is, how you have the time, if you build those fees the right way, mm-hmm. It can be affordable to the patient and you have the time built in to learn how to do it really well. Like learn how to do it like Cheryl Chapman does it. Don't learn how to do it like Chris Wolf does it. And then you've got the time built in there. You know what I mean? And that's where I think people miss the boat is they think about it and they're looking immediately, they price it just high enough where they're like, oh, this is more than I would have made. But then as soon as it becomes challenging for them to do, like they get to a challenging case, then they're kind of like, oh, this is really tough. And I don't know if it's worth my time. Yeah.
We're getting a little bit of feedback here. I think we missed all of your best points. I know, really? I am.
Oh, was it the point I made about being better like Cheryl Chapman and not being like Chris Wolf?
Yeah, I caught that. Chris, I think you're doing a fine job with myopia management.
Thanks.
So,
not working?
I'm hearing you off and on. I don't know. It's like a truck driver's going by. Okay, so I guess I would ask you the question, do you feel like it's better to break it into pieces where they pay at follow-up visits when they come back? And then if they miss a follow-up visit, they don't pay for that follow-up visit? Or do you think it's better to say, this is a global fee, but we're going to let you make monthly payments on it?
I think I like them both. That's a walking the fence. I like them both, but mine is the first way that you described. So it's different than yours. And the reason I like that method is that I treat it like it's like another eye disease. If I have a patient.
That's not different than mine. That's how I'm doing it. That's my new way that I'm trying right now is
not to make payments over time, but to make basically fee for service.
Fee for service. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it also does spread it out over time for them by doing it that way. Yes. And my profitability, if they come to all of their visits, ends up being about the same.
Yeah, actually. Yeah. So that's how I like, that's the model that I like. It's essentially very similar, except that like you could, if they had a payment plan, you might be charging them every month or, every quarter or something like that. But I still think that you'll front load some of your work so that if the patient doesn't come back for a follow-up, you've already generated the revenue for that expertise and experience to get them to the point of having that. But if they say, it's just not worth my time to come back at the 3, 6, or 9 month, but I'm going to come back at the year. Okay, well, I wasn't at the time, as long as I had the availability for the appointment. Maybe I couldn't have titrated their care well enough or as well as I otherwise would have, but that same thing happens in other disease states. And yeah.
So the reason I decided to go with the fee for service was because a lot of times once I've had a patient in a myopia management for a couple of years and I've seen really good stability, sometimes I stop seeing them every 3 months. Sometimes I move
Yeah.
it to every 6 months. Or if I have an adult ortho-K patient who is not a progressive myope, I don't see them every 3 months usually, not once we get them established. So
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that when people think through what we're talking about here, I hope that they can see that it's much more accessible financially for a patient, and also reasonable for the practice to integrate some of those steps. Because you run with kind of really the deep ortho-K myopia managers, right?
yes.
And what's your sense on how they would view that?
Fee for service.
Yeah.
I know some of them do it, and some
They
of
do
them
it.
do global. Yeah, it's mixed. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that they've tried it more than one way.
Yeah.
Because we're all evolving and we're all trying to figure out what's going to work best for our patient population.
So have you seen yet that patients are more accepting of that?
Too early to tell.
Yeah.
Like really, literally, it's happened in the last 2 weeks. So.
Yeah. What do you think? There's another question I was going to ask you about that we had talked about that I wanted to follow up before with, but it just slipped my mind. It's too late.
I'm sorry, Chris. Was it about how I'm better at myopia management than you?
No, you made that abundantly clear.
I'm joking.
Yeah, no, what's fun about so Cheryl, I was thinking about I really like to have a conversation with you for a multitude of reasons. One is that I feel like we are aligned in so many ways, but I also feel like you are not afraid to disagree with me in a way that is not that doesn't worry if we're gonna like have hash out some things, right? So like I guess that's fun because you're like almost like in that sense it's like, well, I get some mutual respect from you, but you can throw me under the bus a little bit, and that's good. I want that, And then it also allows me to kind of say, am I misthinking something here? I wonder what Cheryl would say about that, because I don't think that you'd necessarily agree with me right away, or even necessarily over time. And I really just value that, that aspect of our conversations and our relationship.
Well, thank you, Chris. I feel I'm very flattered that you think enough of my opinion to care what I would think about it. So thank you.
No, it's good. It's good. It helps me work through things. I have really boring conversations when I think I'm agreeing with somebody all the time. Not that it's boring to me. I just think like, I'm a blowhard. I like to talk, and I like to hear myself talk probably. And so it's good to hear like, okay, Chris, that probably doesn't make sense, or that works, but how does this work? So anyway, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's not what I was forgetting to say, but there was something else that it was about myopia management, and it was about global fees.
Insurance.
Oh, that is what it was. So but it's not the way you think I'm going to probably go, because I know that you decided to drop a big insurer, a big managed vision care plan recently.
2.
You dropped 2 of them.
Yes, I'm so glad.
When are you anticipating seeing the impact of that, where you'll actually see a trickle through? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know. Let's ask this, because we're on the topic. What pushed you over the edge and said, I'm done with this?
What pushed me over the edge was when one of the vision plans said, well, you can't use your lab anymore, and you can't use your products. You have to use our lab and our products. And I was like, you know what? Forget you. It is a great time. There is no time like the present to reinvent ourselves.
Yeah.
We already were, at a point when we've got all this stuff going on in our practice that's limiting patient flow. And the last thing I want to do is have an argument with a patient about billing their medical insurance because they're diabetic with a retinal tear, MGD, and cataracts. And they want this vision plan to cover their exam today. And there's no coordination of benefits. And they're arguing with us and saying that they just want a routine exam. And I'm just like, no, I'm over it. Like, I would rather have patients in my chair. If I can only see X number of patients per day, and my schedule is pretty full, I'm going to just see the patients where I get paid more and I don't have to argue with them to give them the care I want to give them. I would rather provide quality over quantity any day of the week. And it's just, when you have a practice where you're doing a lot of medical and you have all of this high-end equipment and high-end technology, and you're doing, these exams, they're not 10-minute exams.
Right.
It's really hard to be profitable when the insurance company doesn't want to pay you anything. So yeah, we dumped one, and then we decided we're going to dump the other one as of January 1st. And then we're going to be done with vision plans. And, I know that there are some doctors that I've listened to at Vision by Design conference that have talked about this. And I've always been trying to, pluck up the courage to do it. And I thought, if I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. So let's rip off that Band-Aid and learn how to move forward.
Do you have any, so since you've done that, did you have a real clear plan in place to have a communication with those patients where you were on their plan before and now you're not? And how do they, how do you achieve that?
So we talked about it a lot as a staff and what our plan was going to be. And we elected not to send a letter to our patients. We didn't want to give patients the impression that we don't want to see them. We decided to handle it on a case-by-case basis as these patients are coming up due for their exams, so that we can tell this patient why we can still see them and how we're going to bill it. And it's going to go to their medical insurance, often like it had the previous year, but that their refraction is going to be out of pocket, and they can submit their out-of-network benefits to get partial reimbursement for that refraction fee. And I think when you do it that way, you have that opportunity to talk to each patient individually so that you can describe their specific situation to them. I believe that if we had sent out a mass email or a mass letter, that we would lose far more patients that way. It's been really interesting because this is very recent. We got rid of that vision plan October 13th. So since that time, it's amazing the number of patients who have said, oh, well, then why am I paying for that? Why I'm not going to sign up for that next year. Yeah. And so that's really encouraging when you hear your patients say that. And you'll lose some. And some of them are the ones you want to lose because they're the ones who only wanted what their insurance covered anyways. And so you get rid of a lot of the headaches that way. But yeah, it's really interesting and encouraging when you hear patients kind of support you in that way and saying that they're just going to drop that plan. Every year, once a year, we've always done a 50% off sale. And our patients have come to know that. They're always like, are you having that sale again in February? We're like, yep, we sure are. And so what we've decided is now that we're dropping all of our vision plans, we're going to hold our sale twice a year. So what we found during those sales, when you're doing 50% off a pair of glasses, it frequently was almost the exact same cost to the patient as if they had used vision plan insurance. Because a lot of them would come in with their vision plan and say, oh, I want to, take advantage of the sale. And, oh, here's my insurance. And we're like, well, it's one or the other. So then you'd figure it out to see which way was more beneficial for them. And it was like dollars different. And so we've been telling our patients that too. We're like, hey, you can even still get your glasses with us. If you don't want to, fine, here's your prescription, go elsewhere, go to a vision plan provider. I was trying not to say that. That's fine. But yeah, so yeah, if they want to take their prescription, fine. But if you want to get your glasses with us, you still can. We're doing this in February and we're going to do it again, I don't know, probably September or whatever. And so if you're not in any big hurry for your glasses, just plan on doing it then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, so to play the other side of it, and the reason that we haven't done that, I mean, well, to be honest, you know this, cause you were probably,
I was there
with my dad when they did it. And I think, in retrospect, I think this is what my dad would probably say too, is that they probably made the mistake of when those patients called in and wanted to use their plan instead of like really doing what you're doing. And I don't know how prevalent it was to do it back then, but there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. He was just like, we're done with it. And so then they dropped it, and then they sent him to other providers that were good docs. You know what I mean? So I think you might have just purchased the practice or purchased I can't remember what happened. But
what happened, Chris, was your dad dumped one of the vision plans while he still owned both practices. And the reason he did it was because that vision plan said, because he didn't want to keep it at the Omaha location.
Right.
And the vision plan said, no, if you're on it in one place, you have to be on it in both places.
Right.
So then he kicked them to the curb.
Right.
And so it was definitely to my advantage to be able to watch this Genesis, because I learned a lot. I learned a lot from watching that. And yes, we did end up taking that vision plan back when I purchased the practice. And we did it mostly because we just needed to be busier. We needed to farm that vision plan for medical patients. And we did that. And we did that for years. But now we've got all these medical patients. I don't want to put up with them anymore, especially as they've gotten harder and harder to work with.
You don't want to put up with the vision plan, not the medical patients.
That's correct. I did not want to get rid of my patients. I wanted to get rid of the vision insurance because they were, at a time when optometry has taken such a beating.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, these vision plans, do you think they're still getting their premiums paid by these patients?
Of course.
Yes, they are. And are they paying out claims? No, they're not. So at a time when it's been a windfall for these vision plans, they decided to really stick it to optometrists. Like, shame on them, really.
Yeah. I mean,
shame on them.
So here's the reason I think, so I'm in that same boat right now where I'm as busy as I need to be. And the amount of patients that actually come to see me that actually build their vision plan is probably it's certainly less than 20%. It's probably close to 10%.
Right.
Now what that means is that, but that's misleading because, and you've heard me talk about this before, and this is my fear, is that you talked about, I believe that managed vision care plan becomes a marketing expense. And if you understand how to manage all that stuff in your practice, then those patients have other diseases. And so you get the opportunity to take care of those patients with those other diseases. And so for me, it's still kind of saying, look, I'll do that but we have to be very rigorous. And you're right. Like it's almost like they come in droves where most of the time patients are great. And then you get these patients, and Dr. Lindsay has seen this handful of patients over the last week or two, where it's like you came in and your 5 chief complaints none of them were related to your vision. In fact, you don't even wear glasses at distance or near. Your only complaints were related to, symptoms that you were having related to eye disease. Yeah. And then they throw a fit because you build their medical plan. It's like, I mean, I'm with you. It's like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like you should, anyway, I feel the fact that you kind of have this weight lift off your shoulder because you don't have to have those conversations on the back end anymore. Even when you're proactive. I mean, we're very proactive about those conversations with patients, and we'll have, and it's up to us to explain that to patients. And we get no backing from the insurance plans. In fact, there's one, and I did a bonus episode about this, and it's there's an insurance plan that sells additional coverage for diabetes care.
Yep.
And if you look at the fine print of what it says broadly on their website, that diabetes care, if you have this plan, right, if you have this rider on this vision plan, it is secondary to the healthcare plan if the provider is a provider on that medical plan. And yet when the patient calls, we've had a couple patients, well, it's one family in particular, and both the parents have diabetes, and they called this plan. We're a provider on their medical plan, but the vision plan threw us under the bus. And we said, look, here is what it says in our contract and on the provider website. This is what it says about that, which means we have to submit it to your medical plan first, and then we submit it to your vision plan. And the vision plan said, no, they paid extra for that. That's what they get. Like, of course, you're just talking to whoever answers the phone at that vision plan. They don't have any idea.
Well,
but that stuff is so...
Yeah, the key is if you don't like what they say, you just hang up and call again because you get a different answer every time.
Yeah. So I think the point for me is that I feel like we've built up enough systems in place to manage that, and it does typically happen so infrequently that it's still worth it. But boy, it is such a silly game. Like you get to just the beauty of what you're doing does give you the ability to just be like, what do I need to take care of here, right? Like you got a problem, we're going to fix the problem, and then we just make it, we make it better. And the stuff that we're doing in terms of accepting managed vision care plans, I think is working right now for our office. And I do think my concern is if I dropped it, what's going to happen to the longevity of a practice where we have new associates that could come in, right? If we're growing and we want a new associate, how are they going to generate, how are they going to get patients? And also what it does, you and I are hardened, right? Because we've been in practice for long enough. But I think about what does that do to the psyche of a new doctor, right? Or a relatively new doctor that is, believes to their core of being able to take care of patients and really wanting to take care of them. But when a patient that they just provided really great care for is upset because they only want their vision plan, which reimburses them 1/5 or 1/6 of what their value of the service they just got, that's disheartening.
It is disheartening.
And it tears them up.
It's bad for staff morale when you get enough of those patients in a short period of time that just yell at you about wanting only what their insurance covers.
No, only what their vision plan covers.
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. Well, but they use those term insurance.
Of course.
So I'm repeating what the patients say because they don't understand the difference. But what I think you need to think about also, Chris, is staff time and how much time it takes to file vision plan claims, and how much time it takes, not just for services, but also for product. And I swear it's a whole extra employee, at least.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, and even if you think about the fact that, if like maybe I would see half as many patients in my day. And I don't see, me, I don't see a ton of patients every day. We see a patient every half hour on my schedule, essentially, a little bit more than that because we have some extra slots in there. But I'm not seeing a whole bunch of patients, but if I would basically be as full as I am now. But if you have an associate that's seeing, let's say, half the number of patients that they were seeing, but they're seeing them for 4 times as much, right? Then you don't really need even the amount of staff that you have. You can run leaner. I think there are different models. I want to explore. I think, I want to explore your experience in this model, again, in the next 6 months and 12 months, just to kind of keep checking in on it, because I think it's interesting. And I hope that I know you'll do it the right way where people are going to still come to you. I have no illusions that you won't, but it'll be interesting to see how you do that.
So Chris, I probably have mentioned this to you before, but one of my very favorite books is The Pumpkin Plan by Mike Michalowicz. Have I ever talked to you about this book?
No, but he also wrote, did he write Profit First?
Yeah, he did. He wrote Profit First. Yep. So The Pumpkin Plan is basically an analogy about like how to grow a business versus how do you grow a giant pumpkin. And obviously, if you want to take this prized giant pumpkin to the state fair, when you're growing it on the vine, you have to clip off all the other buds and just put all the resources into growing that one giant pumpkin, right? So I look at these vision plan insurances as like distractors. And so if I really want to be great at myopia management, and if I really want to be great at dry eye therapies, and I really want to have all these specialty services, I have to get rid of all this crap. I have to get rid of all of the stuff that's trying to take my attention. And so what has been really neat in the last couple months since we dropped the first vision plan is that I have seen staff time freed up to do more stuff with regards to some of our social media presence, posting on Instagram, talking about myopia management, creating really great tutorials on ortho-K insertion and care. And so my staff is just like, doing an awesome job of utilizing their extra time that they've just been gifted. So it's great. Like that part of it's great. And I feel like if we don't make a really concerted effort to grow the things that we want to grow, we're just going to be stuck in the same routines that we used to be in.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think this is fun because, again, I think you and I get to have a back and forth, and sometimes I get to change your mind, and sometimes you get to change my mind. And right now, I look at, like, in terms of my pumpkin, I look at one of the ways that is feeding my pumpkin, right? Feeding to grow that pumpkin bigger is the managed vision care plans. But I'm not saying that's the only way or even the best way to do it. It's just right now is the way I've wrapped my mind around, and I understand that model, right? I understand that model of if I do have time to be as excellent as I can be in some of these other spokes of that wheel, but if I take this out, my concern is how are we going to continue to add new to it when the first place that those patients might go is a page that tells them who's on their vision plan, even though I might be on their medical plan.
Yeah. And I get that. I totally get that. And that's why I stayed on those plans for as long as I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, like I said, this year's a crazy year. And if there was ever a time to try it, now's the time to try it. And if it doesn't work, I don't even want to utter those words.
I'm sure they'll take you. I'm sure they would. The funny part is that unless they hear this podcast, I'm sure they'll take you back.
Of course they would take me back. They would love to pay me nothing. They would love, they would love nothing more than to pay me nothing.
That's right. If a patient knew, this is the crazy part about all that, is if a patient knew that they're paying this plan on the front end, or their business is paying this plan on the front end to get the benefit of what they're getting for getting reimbursed for their exam, what the doctor's getting reimbursed for their exam. And then when they actually buy a pair of glasses, how much they're making on that as well. Like, I think I wish we just had a really great breakdown of like, oh, okay, so here's your benefits, right? Like, here's what you would have paid if you paid out of pocket. Here's what you paid with your plan, and here's what you're paying to your plan, right? And then this is what we get to keep on the back end of that. Like, if you could actually show a patient, like, they'd be like, wait, I'm actually, all this stuff I'm paying, I'm actually paying to my insurance plan for, something I thought I already paid for. And like, that's not insurance, but people don't think about it. And they love their vision plans, right? So like, I mean, they think they do.
They think they do. And that's part of our job right now is educating them on how, if they don't put that money into that vision plan, they can use it at our office and they'll be better off for it. And their out-of-pocket costs are going to be so similar, especially for a lot of these patients who have been medical, and we've been talking to them forever about, no, this doesn't go to your vision plan because you have this medical diagnosis and it's billing to your medical insurance. Like, a lot of our patients have said yes to that and not given us a ton of pushback. And so now our job is to tell them, we're going to bill exactly the same way we did before. You just aren't going to be able to use your vision plan to get your glasses here. But we have this sale coming up, and you're more than welcome to come and get them during that sale. And oh, by the way, you could just stop paying for your vision plan next year and get all this benefit. And so a lot of them are like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's fun to think through the different ways of communicating about it and working through it. And I'm sure you'll have some creative ways to do it. So Cheryl, I'll be respectful of your time. I already haven't been. We've been on for a long time, but thanks for coming on and chatting about this with me tonight. It's been a lot of fun.